Hey guys, it's Danny. Today it is time for a new Myth or Truth episode. I forgot what episode we're at, but the series is coming back. We have a new sponsor for it. So today I'm going to debunk some myths that you guys left in the comment section, and I have some really good ones for you today. But of course, feel free to always leave me a comment if you'd like me to talk about a certain thing that sounds a little bit weird. You might want to know if it's a truth or myth. Absolutely, leave me a comment and I might answer in the next episode. Today's video, together with the series from now on, is sponsored by obviously repotme.com, my very long time sponsor, who offers you everything you could possibly need to properly take care of your orchid, from pots to potting mixes, fertilizers, accessories, and many more. They have everything. I'll also link you down below to some of my favorite stuff that I have been using for a lot of years, some of which I used even before our collaboration, so feel free to check them out at any time. And with that said, I have a list. I always have lists. Let's see what myths you guys left in the comments. Right, first off, orchids should only be repotted when new growth is visible, and that is of course false. Orchids should be repotted whenever it is necessary. If an orchid is suffering in its pot, you should repot it regardless if there is any new growth or new roots or anything of the sorts, regardless of flowers. The most important thing on an orchid is arguably the root system, at least in my opinion. So for me, that's always a priority. But this whole idea of let's repot whenever we see new growth sprouts from Cattleyas, I would say, because Cattleyas are the ones who are most prone to having some difficulties after repotting. If you'd like a more in-depth explanation on why that is, check out the description. I always have my Cattleya tutorial linked down below. Basically, Cattleyas do tend to have more sensitive roots than other orchids that I personally own. So I am a little bit careful whenever I repot Cattleyas that I don't do so in a season in which they will not grow roots for a long time. Some Cattleyas grow new roots whenever new growth sprouts, but others just grow roots whenever they feel like, after the growth starts, after they bloom, after the growth matures, before they bloom. There is so much variety within the Cattleya, and not only other orchids as well, that saying you should repot whenever you see new growth might not be the right moment for everybody. If you'd like to repot at the best moment universally for any orchid, it would be, I would say, whenever you see new roots growing, because you know that you won't have to wait too much for new roots to get adapted to the new environment. Even if you lose the old roots, it's okay. New roots are there, you see them. So that's the perfect time. But do I follow it every time? No, I don't. Absolutely not, especially with something like a Phalaenopsis, which typically doesn't really suffer much whenever I repot. With something like a Cattleya, I might be tempted to, but also keep in mind it has to do with the potting mix. Bark potting mixes attach to roots and they are more prone to damage the roots whenever you repot and you remove the bark, while sphagnum moss is really not so damaging, even if it's compacted. If you're a little careful with a pair of tweezers, you shouldn't really damage roots all that much. So if we take that statement at face value, it's absolutely wrong, because orchids don't produce roots whenever they produce new growth. They have different timings along the year, and especially valid with Cattleyas. But with some, it is valid. It's just not necessarily a majority. Ooh, I'm gonna need a sip of coffee for the next one. Orchids can be propagated through flower spikes. We're gonna turn back a little bit to a viral kind of video that made the rounds a while back, with somebody propagating orchids by cutting flower spikes, putting them in a vase with sphagnum moss, and behold, keikis. Well, let me answer first that question. It is false. You cannot successfully and sustainably propagate Phalaenopsis orchids through their flower spikes. Now, it is true that Phalaenopsis can actually produce baby plants that we call keikis on their flower spikes. They have growth nodes along these spikes, and it's quite often that you see a tiny little keiki sprouting, especially if you don't cut the flower spikes all the way down. You can also encourage a keiki artificially by using keiki paste, which is a paste that has hormones. So yes, keikis can sprout from flower spikes, but that is not the problem. The problem is these keikis will need to be fed by the mother plant, since they don't have any means to feed themselves. And since they will be very tiny, they will not actually photosynthesize for themselves adequately to grow the structures they need. From a tiny little nubbin, we need to grow leaves and roots. That consumes a lot of energy, which a tiny little nubbin cannot perform. It cannot make food for itself. We need actual leaves. So the keiki depends on the mother plant at least until it produces roots, because okay, we're gonna have leaves at some point, but we also need to absorb some water, and without roots, we cannot. So the problem will not be sprouting something from those flower spikes. You might actually get some leaves sprouting there. The problem will be making them reach maturity, which I believe without the mother plant is highly unlikely. Maybe trying out an experiment, but done the right way, to try and actually obtain one keiki, certainly not 100, but one keiki that is viable and will live on. Maybe it's worth doing. I don't know if it's a waste of time or not, but I might try it. If you see it posted on my channel, it worked. If you don't see it posted, it might not have worked. I don't know, we'll see. But definitely, it is not sustainable. Keikis need mother plants to fully develop. It's not enough to have a little nub swell, a leaf sprouting, or things of the sorts. That's not the end of the story, so we should not end the video there. We should end the video with a plant in its own pot. Otherwise, it's not gonna work. And it is my opinion that it's not sustainable and it's not really working. So for me, it's a myth. Next myth, Catasetum orchids need repotting every season. And well, I'm gonna say between truth and actually no, I'm gonna say yeah, it's truth. But the thing is, they don't need repotting necessarily. It is a good idea to repot them every year. Catasetum orchids have a very specific type of growth in the sense that they are deciduous, and once a year they will lose all of their leaves. They will become bare, but that's not the only thing that happens. Some of them, or most of them, depending on the hybrid, do go through a sort of dormancy. And in that dormancy, they don't require water, they don't really require much of anything since they have everything stored in the pseudobulbs. And offering water might actually rot the roots. So depending how long the dormancy is, the roots might actually not make the dormancy. And it actually happens with my Catasetums that the roots don't last 2 years. At the end of the dormancy, let's say at the end of the first year, I might have some live roots, which I used to let be, and some of them do survive, but a very small number. Many of them will die off during their second year, and I prefer not to let them be in the pot because they just spoil the new medium. The roots that are most important for a Catasetum are the new roots, which are produced every single year from the new growth. The old growth does not produce new roots anymore, and whatever older roots are still alive, in my experience, don't really last all that well through their second year. So I prefer to cut everything once a year, typically after the dormancy, because I know it's not gonna help anything. They're gonna wither off anyway. So because of that, yes, I do consider it truth, because yes, I do believe it's good practice. But if you wanna be like very, very correct about it, no, they don't need to be cut. They will last a few more months, but they certainly do not behave like other orchids' roots. So it is good practice to cut them. The orchid will not suffer because, as I was saying, we rely on the new root system, which happens once a year, and it is the main root system the orchid will have for that year. And the cycle kind of repeats itself. So how should we call this? A draw? In between truth myth? Let me know. Next myth, Phalaenopsis orchids, and I will just say the flower shop hybrids, they need a temperature drop in order to bloom. And that is true. Now, my viewer gave me a difference of temperature of 10 degrees. Not sure if they're Fahrenheit or Celsius. I'm just gonna say forget about that number. What you need to know is that the Phalaenopsis actually do need to reach about 18 degrees Celsius in the nighttime, at least, in the winter or beginning of winter or autumn, in order to initiate flower spikes. That is absolutely true. There are other Phalaenopsis, such as the Polychilus, which don't. That's why we're going to refer only to the flower shop hybrids, which are induced into spiking by the drop in temperature. That's how the nurseries do it. That's how they provide these orchids all year round. They control the temperature. And if you check my tutorial on how to rebloom Phalaenopsis, you will also find out how temperature affects them. And furthermore, since I actually lived in 2 countries with kind of very different climates, I am 100% comfortable with saying from my own experience that temperature is the only aspect affecting when your orchid will produce a spike. It's not the duration of the day, it's not sunset, sunrise, it's not any other thing other than temperatures, 100%. So if you don't have other issues with your Phalaenopsis, such as severe stress, setback, disease, or other things, then yes, temperature should definitely help you out. The thing is, there are so many hybrids with a little bit of a difference in their heritage that some will be induced into spiking by 22 degrees Celsius or 20 degrees Celsius. So it's gonna be easier to rebloom them even if you don't offer a considerable drop. But there are others that have some species in their heritage which need a little more, which need, let's say, 18 degrees. So in my tutorials, I go with 17, 18 degrees Celsius across the board just to cover as many hybrids as possible, because I don't know what type of hybrids you guys have. My Phalaenopsis don't all respond the same way. Even these flower shop Phalaenopsis can be slightly different between them. They will not necessarily all require the exact same temperature or treatment. But to answer to your question, yes, it is truth. We need a little bit of temperature drop for the Phalaenopsis to initiate new flower spikes. Not side branches, we're talking about new flower spikes. Here's one that I kind of answered in a previous video, but it was slightly different because probably that's what it was trending at the time. Now something else is trending. Orchids can be watered with sugar and coconut water. There will always be a new TikTok or viral Instagram video, whatever kids do these days. There will always be a viral something telling you to use food scraps in order to, I don't know, obtain something on your orchid, and everything you will ever see regarding food scraps is wrong. I will not rest until the trend will be to water with rose water. I shall claim that idea, because it's my kind of meme idea. One day we're gonna use rose water. Why not? It works just as well as coconut water, because it doesn't work. The thing is, our orchid pots are not compost piles. Yes, we all know that we can put food scraps in our compost pile and let it transform through chemical processes in fertilizer, in compost, right? Well, this is not a compost pile, it does not work in the same way, and we should not use it in the same way. So of course you're gonna have mold issues, and if you don't have mold issues, which would be the luckiest scenario, you won't see any difference on your orchid. More than a placebo, you should not see anything because they don't actually do anything. What orchids need are the basic nutrients, which are macros like NPK, magnesium, and also micros, boron, manganese, copper, all of those fun stuff, which you can get already prepared from a fertilizer. Now, these substances can occur in a compost pile as well. After the whole chemical breakdown happens, that's what you're gonna get. That's what feeds plants. But again, this is not a compost pile. Food scraps, they will just attract pathogens of all sorts, depending on your environment. Could be mold, could be bacteria, could be all sorts of stuff that you actually don't want in your orchid pot. So any food scraps that you might see on TikTok, including rose water, will not do anything for your orchid. For your orchid, no, but for them, yes. Next up, Bifoliate Cattleyas are harder to rebloom and even grow. And I will have to say, that's kind of false, because I'm not sure if we're really talking about species or hybrids here. Even species, I find that Cattleyas are just kind of unpredictable, and I would rather not make these types of rules between unifoliate and bifoliate Cattleyas. And if you don't know, the unifoliate Cattleyas only have one leaf on top of their pseudobulb, and bifoliates have 2 leaves. And then there's this guy who should be a bifoliate, but sometimes it produces 3 leaves on top. In my experience, some of these bifoliate Cattleyas are so much easier to rebloom because they don't produce a sheath. They just produce the buds directly, and I have the lady in red, sorry. That one produces buds every time a pseudobulb matures, no sheath required. It blooms very fast, very nice, multiple times a year. And I also have a unifoliate Cattleyas that I wait around for them for a year to rebloom again. And sometimes if the sheath is blank and something is not to its liking, it's not gonna bloom. And then I have the opposite, easy unifoliate Cattleyas and more finicky bifoliates. So for me, There isn't a rule, and I would definitely not generalize it like bifoliates are harder and unifoliates are easier. I know this used to be something in an article at some point. It was very old. I don't think it is such a popular belief nowadays anymore, but I think some people still propagate that. In my experience, no, there's no rule actually. And if you think about, I don't know, the Dowiana, oh boy, is that easy to bloom? You tell me. And she's a unifoliate, because I don't think she's all that easy to bloom. It's just like any other Cattleya which blooms once a year, not multiple times a year. Next up, Bulbophyllum orchids need high humidity to bloom, and that is false. Actually, Bulbophyllums are some of the easiest plants to bloom. They're kind of like Phalaenopsis. They don't require a whole lot of light, they don't need a whole lot of humidity, they do require to stay more moist. Yes, that is true. They tend to not handle drought as well as Phalaenopsis, nor do they actually need that drop in temperature to bloom. Actually, my Bulbophyllums now are in spike, so yeah, definitely we don't need that temperature drop with all of them. If there are some species which do, I don't know, I don't own them, but the ones that I own, they don't really need temperature drops. And I will extend a little bit this discussion to other orchids as well. The orchids that I currently have in my collection, which are the most popular orchids on the market: Cattleyas, Phalaenopsis, Bulbophyllums, Vandas, Oncidiums. All of these orchids don't really fuss much about humidity. Will they say no to it? No. Because that humidity, what it actually does is prevent excessive transpiration, which, you know what, is nice. You will not have to water your orchid as often if the orchid retains its water better. However, these orchids, which most of them are epiphytic, they are so well adapted to drought that there's no point in hassling with humidifiers, grow tents, greenhouses just to offer humidity. You can use all of those things if it's easier for you to grow these orchids, obviously, but just to offer humidity for these types, no, it's not worth it. There are definitely orchids who do really enjoy high humidity and do not perform well without high humidity, such as Masdevallias, Draculas. I would go and say Phalaenopsis as well, but the vast majority of the ones that I show you on my channel, they do not need high humidity. That's why I own them, because I don't want to hassle with the high humidity. And certainly Bulbophyllums are not one of those that you need to jump through hoops to offer humidity for, because they will perform and do well and bloom in whatever type of humidity you have in your home. Just remember not to let them dry too much, because they don't like drought at all. And lastly, orchids can live forever. Well, that is truth. And actually, I think I do have an old video with, I think it was a Q&A. Somebody asked me how long do orchids live, and I said, well, technically they can live forever, because not only do they themselves have a long life, but some orchids, such as sympodials, always produce new growth. So if you eliminate the older growth, which in years upon years, obviously, it can dry off, it can be too damaged to function. If we cut the old part and keep the new part, well, it's as good as new, isn't it, right? So if we don't mess it up, it can live that way forever. Plus, with monopodials, you have keikis. So even if something happens to the mother plant, you can have the keiki living on, which is something that I did with one of my Phalaenopsis. So it is very hard to say how long an orchid lives, because it can actually be regenerated like that. And it really depends on the orchid, how you regenerate it. So I would say yes, orchids can live forever. Depends what this forever means. If it means 200 years, yeah, I think they can definitely live that long. If it means 1,000 years, like an individual living 1,000 years, I don't know about that. Let's have a sensible approach to things. Maybe they can't really live forever, but I think they can outlive us, that's for sure. And that is it for today. Remember, you can leave me your myth or truth questions down below in the comment section, and I will do my best to answer in a future episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Thank you rePotme for sponsoring this not very new series, but a reboot of the series. Also, if you're into aquariums and other plants, maybe check out my second channel. I'll link it down below. But for orchid stuff, do subscribe to this channel. I do post every week. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye!